Welcome back to Stories from History, where we go over interesting stories from history, whether it's about great people, interesting events, that type of thing. And we've been going on a bit of a streak recently, just kind of focusing on great people, great generals, interesting figures from like early Roman history, that kind of thing. But today I thought I'd pivot and talk about someone who's just as interesting as those guys, maybe even more so. um, One of the most famous, influential artists, thinkers, intellects of all time, Leonardo da Vinci. I'm sure many of you know about Leonardo da Vinci from his some of the most famous works of art ever. You got the Mona Lisa, you got the Last Supper, uh, you could go on. But not many people know about this guy's life. He's a very eccentric guy. You can imagine that a mind like his comes with a very interesting personality. And that's exactly what Leonardo was. He entered the world as an illegitimate son of a respected notary called Ser Piero. And he was an outsider from birth. He was a child that belonged to two separate worlds. He wasn't really accepted by either. His mother was a rural peasant girl. So in a way, that kind of helped Leonardo because their child grew up without the heavy expectation placed on aristocratic son. And historians kind of believe that that freedom is what helped shape him to be the free thinker that he was. And from the beginning, this guy was different. While other boys were running through the fields playing with sticks or swords, he was looking at the ground, looking at how the ants organized themselves, looking at how the rocks were formed. While other boys were throwing stones, he was looking at the arc of the stone's flight, the dust curling behind it, the impact that it leaves on the earth. His mind was always questioning things. Why do birds fly? You know, why does light behave the way it does? Uh, how do muscles pull on bone? How does it all work together? And the people around him noticed this at a young age. His grandfather wrote that Leonardo as a boy seemed thoughtful beyond his years. And he was indeed, he was a quiet, watchful guy. And he was more fascinated by, the shape and anatomy of a leaf than by the lessons that were taught to him in conventional school. And so we go to his apprenticeship where it all kind of starts off. As a teenager, he entered the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence. And this is a big studio. I had paint, bronze, marble, inventions going on, and he was quick to amaze Verrocchio. Legend says that when Verrocchio saw Leonardo's angel painted in the baptism of Christ, he declared that he would never paint again. And Leonardo's personality at this time was already defined. He was a brilliant guy, easily bored, gentle, shy, often aloof, very sensitive, extremely loved beauty, and obsessive over projects that he found interesting. But it was impossible to motivate the guy for things that didn't interest him. And he was known as a charming guy, but very private, polite, and yet withdrawn. His first biographer says. And he was also known as a very attractive guy physically as well. He was in great shape, of good stature, long hair. He kept his hair and his beard in an unconventional fashion. He let it flow, where at that time it was kind of accustomed to keep things a bit more neat. But he himself was a very beautiful guy, apparently. And he was a man of contradiction. His personality was full of tensions. He loved animals deeply. He refused to eat meat. His biographer says he would buy caged birds in the market just to release them. He dressed very flamboyantly, often in pink garments, well-tailored, elegant. Vasari, his first biographer, says he wore a rose-colored tunic that came only to his knees, which was at the time, quite a fashion statement, quite a shocking thing to do, right? He was very meticulous about order, but his rooms were famously cluttered with, all types of sketches, inventions, half-finished sculptures, bones. Um, he was a very gentle, loving man. He spent his nights, dissecting corpses for science. Um, and he struggled to finish paintings. Um, but he filled thousands of pages with notes. And although he was a deeply solitary man, he was very loved by many people, and he lived inside of his mind, a vast kind of uncharted territory that even he could barely navigate.
Yeah.
And we spoke a little bit about bones earlier. Well, that's one of the crazy aspects of his life, is that this guy performed a lot of human dissections, cutting up corpses to see what's going on in the human body, very quietly, secretly, carefully. He'd work in hospitals, monasteries, and medical schools where bodies were available to scholars. And this guy dissected the elderly, he dissected infants, criminals, the sick, the recently dead, and sometimes even the nearly dead. Leonardo would do this by candlelight. In the dead of the night, he would open up bodies, and layer by layer, he would draw the muscles, nerves, veins, and organs with insane levels of precision. He was the first to draw accurate descriptions of the human spine, the human fetus in the womb, the sinus cavities, the heart's ventricular structure, and the motion of facial muscles linked to emotion. He wrote famously, "You will look upon that marvelous instrument, the human body, which is a world in itself." But make no mistake about it, he was not morbid. He was hungry for truth. He wanted to understand life at its root. He was a stickler for extreme detail. He's the type of guy who really needed to know. Now, Leonardo's life was not without controversy, of course, particularly regarding, his love life. Leonardo, actually at 24, was arrested in Florence for accusations of engaging in illicit behavior with other men. Him and several other men were arrested. And this was a serious charge in Florence. Now, these charges were dismissed due to a lack of evidence, but this incident left a big mark on his life. After this, Leonardo became extremely private. He never married, he never recorded a female lover, and his closest relationships were consistently with young male assistants. And there's some significant figures that he was associated with. So the first one was Gian Giacomo, or otherwise known as Salai. And this was a young boy that Leonardo took into his household at age 10. And he was a mischievous, thieving, but beautiful, temperamental young man. Leonardo's notes complain of him stealing money, stealing clothes, but Leonardo kept him around for 25 years. Many scholars believe that he was Leonardo's lover, but the definitive proof is impossible to get. And then there was another friend of his, Francesco Melzi. He's the opposite of Salai. He was refined, devoted, gentle, and he joined Leonardo later and stayed with him until his death. And Melzi received Leonardo's notebooks and manuscripts, which is, a sign of deep trust and affection. Historians cannot say with certainty whether Leonardo was intimate with these men, but many interpret evidence from his writings, his lifestyle, the absence of, involvement with women, and his emotional attachments as pointing strongly towards, homosexual or asexual orientation. But what we can say for certainty was that Leonardo was a big fan of beauty, especially in the male form. We see this a lot in his anatomy notebooks. in his, idealized sketches and in the young men that he was surrounded with. He seemed far more emotionally connected to men than women. Leonardo's imagination was always running. He would sketch early versions of helicopters, tanks, machine guns, diving suits, gears and chain drives, robots, self-propelled carts, flying machines, hydraulic systems, anatomical diagrams that were so accurate that they matched modern medicine. And this guy would just fill notebooks. He loved the notebook. He would sometimes write for just 10 hours at a stretch. Friends described him as he would get so engrossed into his ideas that he wouldn't eat. But he rarely built these machines. It was the idea, the elegant solution that was mattered more to him. He once wrote, "A work is never finished; it's only abandoned." In his later years, his energy began to slow, but his curiosity never did. When he began to age, he moved to France under the patronage of King Francis I, who treated him as a treasure. He would call him father, he'd call him master. Leonardo's final notebooks were filled with, diagrams of rivers, botanical studies, machine designs, and philosophical reflections. A servant recorded that he often suffered from melancholy or kind of depressive episodes. Not exactly depression, but more so the sadness of a guy who understood too much and could complete too little. He passed away in 1519 in a small bedroom in the Chateau de Clos-Luce, I believe it said, with his student Melzi at his side. And upon his death, Francis first reportedly said that there has never been another man born in this world who knew as much as Leonardo. So when we gather all the fragments, the notebooks, the anecdotes, the testimonies, we get a picture of this guy. He loved beauty more than comfort. He studied death to understand life better. He trusted animals more than people. He looked for truth in everything. He felt extremely deeply, but he lived very quietly. And his genius overwhelmed the world, and oftentimes himself. He was gentle, he was sensitive, he was brilliant, he was lonely. And he was, without a doubt, one of the greatest minds to ever walk this earth. And yeah, that's the story of Leonardo. Fascinating guy. The true Renaissance man, the true polymath, and a guy who many of our modern inventions and ways of thinking is he's the guy that starts it all off. So yeah, fascinating figure. Deserves to be up there with guys like Napoleon, Caesar, just as much impact. But yeah, if you enjoyed that video, send me a like, comment, subscribe, share, all those cool things to boost the algorithm. And it was very fun to talk to you. Peace out, and hope to see you soon again.